After the Boer victory at the Battle of Blood River, things seemed to be looking up for the Boer republics. They had established Bloemfontein as the capital of the Oranje Vrystaat, or the Orange Free State, and Pretoria had become the capital of the South African Republic, or the Transvaal. And things looked even more promising when in 1852 they met with the British at a farm called Sand River for what was to become known as the Sand River Convention. At this meeting between Andries Pretorius and the British representatives, the British pledged to observe neutrality and to recognise the independence of the Boer republics and not to interfere in their internal affairs. In exchange, the Boers agreed not to keep slaves, and both sides agreed not to arm or encourage any type of rebellion amongst the dark-skinned peoples of the interior. It seemed at this stage that the Boers finally were free of British tyranny and the ability to speak their own language and practice their own culture. And indeed, the Boers, living by a literal interpretation of the Old Testament, President Paul Kruger, until his death, believed that the earth was flat. The British had exhausted funds in a series of engagements with the Xhosa tribe along the Fish River, and the Colonial Office from London had told the local governors to rein in expenditure and not to start any more conflicts. There was war looming with the Zulus, who were a huge militaristic society, and so for the moment the British, looking beyond the Vaal River, saw only dry arid farmland and a subsistence society of Boers living in an agricultural farming community. And there were, of course, some breaches of the convention, the agreements that were signed at Sand River. On the part of the British, the Boers accused the famous missionary David Livingstone of having stored rifles and ammunition at the mission station and preaching to the natives liberalism and rebellion. And on the British side, they always mistrusted the Boers in regards to keeping slaves. Towards the late 1870s, the British began to re-examine the relationship with the Boer republics. It was their intention always to unify the four colonies of Natal, the Cape Province, and the two Boer republics as a unified South Africa. They saw this as a necessity because the Germans, late to the party, in colonial terms, had settled the Southwest African colony and had hemmed in the Boer republics from the west. In response, the British proclaimed a protectorate for Bechuana land, which today is Botswana, the home of the Swana people. Also, the Basutus went to the British and they asked for protection against the Boers and the Zulus. They were being bullied from both sides, and the British offered a protectorate to what was to become Lesotho, or Basutu land. Indeed, by the 1870s, both the Boer republics were on the verge of bankruptcy. They had no money to maintain a standing army, so seemed vulnerable to invasion. They had borrowed money from Britain to build some railway lines, which they had been unable to repay. The border wars between the Zulus and the Boers had never been resolved, and there seemed to be constant conflict in the Boer republics between the native peoples and the Boers. And the British saw this as an opportune time to take a stance. So, breaking the Sand River Convention, they sent a emissary towards Pretoria, and in the town hall, or the central square of Pretoria, they declared they were annexing the Transvaal. Under the annexation, the Transvaal would become a self-governing province within South Africa under the conditions of suzerainty, which would mean Britain would control all external affairs of the Transvaal. The Boers did not take to this kindly, and so they laid siege to British garrisons that were being formed around the Transvaal. In response, the British sent a column under General Colley to invade the Boer republics and bring them to heel. The British marched in wearing their famous crimson jackets and uniforms that were fine targets for the Boer marksmen. And in a series of military blunders, where the British were consistently ambushed and beaten on the battlefield, it came to a head on a mountaintop called Majuba. While we were in that bus on that school trip, the bus was parked, and our teacher pointed out Majuba and explained the meaning of the word, the place where the white doves come to rest. For the African people looking up to the mountaintop, they could see what they poetically called doves laying on the slopes, which were, of course, the whitened bodies of the British. The British retreated, and that was to be known as the First Boer War. The British, not wanting to get bogged down in a lengthy and costly distant war with the Boers, agreed to a peace treaty to be signed in Pretoria in March of 1881. The British would accept self-rule by the Boers within their republics, while the Boers would accept nominally the Queen and the British control of external affairs and indeed native affairs within the republics. So a period followed where President Paul Kruger and the President of the Orange Free State travelled to London to petition Queen Victoria and anyone in Europe that would listen, petition for their independence. In 1886, discovery of gold on the Witwatersrand brought in an influx of foreigners from South Africa and Britain and California, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Europe, all hungry to search for gold on the Witwatersrand. It was a very rich vein of gold, and a lot of money was made in a short period of time. However, these outsiders, or Uitlanders, as the Boers came to know them, had no respect for the Boer customs. Indeed, they openly flaunted their loyalty to Britain and the Queen, waving Union Jacks. They ignored the Sabbath. They drank, they smoked, they womanised, and they were totally disrespectful to their Boer hosts. And the Boers looked down on these Uitlanders, and they provided no infrastructure, made no effort for infrastructure. Where these mining camps were now being built were small towns growing from them, and the Boers gave no support in so far as sanitation or a police force to maintain law and order. They were happy to take the Uitlanders' taxation, but they refused to give them any voting access. By this time, within a short period of time, the Uitlanders outnumbered the Boers 10-1, and the Boers knew if they were to give them the vote, they would be voted out of their own government. There was a huge influx of cash coming into the Boer Republic, and President Kruger now found himself with a large cash box available to him. So he went shopping in Europe, and particularly in Germany, to see the Kaiser. Germany had always supported the Boers. So he was to buy Krupp artillery. President Kruger put in an order for thousands of the very latest Mauser model 1895, a breech-loading, bolt-action, state-of-the-art rifle holding 5 cartridges. Remembering there were only around 30,000 Boer men in the republics at the time. Now the Uitlanders began to protest to the Boers in Pretoria and demand more rights and more representation. And in fact, they sent out word to their friends down in the Cape Colony of the conditions that they were being having to endure under the Boers. A lot of sympathy was being garnered by those down in the Cape Colony and indeed in Britain regarding the plight of the Uitlanders. Now, one of those men that heard their plea was none other than Cecil John Rhodes, who was the governor of the Cape Province, and he had a friend called Leander Starr Jamieson, who was situated in the new colony of Rhodesia, and he put the word out to his friend Leander Starr Jamieson to raise a militia of volunteers, military men that could ride and fight, and to invade the Boer Republic on New Year's Day, and to get to Johannesburg and to support the Uitlanders. The Uitlanders would have hidden rifles and they would be waiting for the invasion force, and they would somewhat they would overthrow the Boers, a coup we would call it. This was in 1896. Now the Boers were nobody's fool, and they were waiting for Jamieson and his men, about 100 of them, to cross the border. And when they did, there was a series of skirmishes where the Rhodesians were soundly thrashed and imprisoned in Pretoria and eventually exiled back to Britain. This, however, told Paul Kruger that war was surely not too far away, and so preparations were made to fortify and to build armories and to buy and import even more ammunition and arms and weaponry from Germany. The stage was now set for the Boer War. The South African Boer War Memorial at Narrandera. The monument commemorates those who served in the South African Boer War. 28 Narrandera men volunteered for the Boer War, the first 4 sailing from Sydney on the 17th of January 1900, and the monument bears the names of these soldiers. Among them was Alf Defreyer, who won a Queen's scarf. Queen Victoria had hand-knitted 4 scarves to be presented for bravery, and after Defreyer had rescued a wounded mate under heavy fire, his colonel recommended him for the award. It was reportedly an equivalent award to the Victoria Cross. Excerpt from the Sydney Morning Herald, New South Wales, dated the 18th of December 1902. The unveiling of Soldiers' Memorial and the opening of a new fire station took place on Wednesday. The Soldiers' Memorial, which has been erected by subscription, is suitably inscribed. It bears on one of the panels the names of troopers Smith, Verdon and Andrew, who lost their lives in the campaign. Other panels are inscribed with the names of soldiers who achieved distinction, numbering 17, including Lieutenant Defreyer, Queen's Scarf, and Mr. Rudd, who was several times mentioned in dispatches. The form of the memorial is a marble obelisk, 14 foot high, and it is erected on the corner of East and Twynham Streets, the most prominent part of the town. Front inscription, erected by the residents of the Narrandera district in commemoration of the local volunteers who served in the South African campaign 1899 to 1902. Plaque, South African Memorial Obelisk. This memorial was unveiled on the 17th of December 1902 by Mayoress Mrs. F.A. Smith. Left side inscription, names: F.W.P. Rudd, A.H. Defreyer, J.R. King, H.S. Hanson, C. Lowe, F.F. Duval, S.T. Evans, J. Norman, G. Waller, J. Hansel, P.H. Hudson. Back inscription, F.W. Duval, C.B. Hanson, A.G. Stevens, J.T. Emery, J. Payne, C. Wicking, P. Leary, E. Stevens, P.J. Lynch, E. Jolly, H. W. Welsh, G. L. Clark, H. Roach. Right side inscription, in memory of J. A. S. Andrew, died Cape Town, February 1900. P. Verdun, died Pretoria, January 1901. W. Smith, died Middelburg, December 1901.